Okay guys, today on Watch with Poppy, we are going to be talking about the latest episode of Deception. Okay guys, so before we get to the good stuff, before we talk J&J, Julian and Joanna, let's talk about the rest of the Bowers family in this episode. So first of all, Mia. So remember the mystery guy from last week, right? He shows up again and kind of whisks her off her feet again. And you get, obviously, that this guy is a little shady and we're just not sure what to think about him, what his agenda is, and we just don't trust him. So she skips school, she goes off with this guy when she's supposed to be doing an interview with her dad that I think she really kind of forgot about, basically. But when she gets home, you know, her dad kind of confronts her about it and she lies to him. But then he tells her, like, look, I know where you were with some guy and you went off to do this thing and you skipped school and now you're lying to me. And so the two kind of get into a little argument and he tells her, like, you can't see this guy anymore. And she's like, yeah, not happy about that, and basically giving him, like, huge attitude. But the best part was that as she's, like, stomping out of the room, you know, after their fight, she, like, throws this bowl of popcorn, like, in the room and just knocks it off the counter and stomps off. And I just thought to myself, like, dude, if that was me when I was a teenager, first of all, my mother would have killed me. I would be dead in the kitchen. And then she would have revived me so that I could clean up the popcorn that I had thrown on the floor. And then she would have killed me again, basically. So Mia is not happy about the fact that her dad tells her she can't see this guy. His name's Kyle. And so she goes to see Sophia, her mom, whatever. And, you know, Sophia kind of patches the hole in the end, takes her shopping, and tells Robert, you need to get over it. We need to invite this kid over and try to, you know, make sure that he's legit. And so by the end of the episode, they've invited him over to the house. So then, though, Sophia, man, that woman, she just never ceases to surprise me. She's dancing with this kid, and, you know, she's all talking all, like, light and like, oh, yes, this and that. And then she leans in and whispers to him and tells him, like, look, if your intentions are anything other than to win my daughter's heart, like, if you have an agenda here, basically, I will eat your heart. And I was just kind of like, dude, you need to be scared because this woman is scary and she's probably, like, willing to do that. She will eat your heart if you screw with her daughter. So that was a bit scary. This week, we kind of found out a little bit more about the whole Kimberly Yeager thing. So Julian goes to Edward and asks him to go talk to Senator Haverstock. But when Edward shows up, Senator Haverstock is not having it. He's basically like, look, I want to see your dad, and that's it. But he does kind of, like, drop this bomb on Edward, and he tells him, like, look, when you killed that girl, I'm the one who took care of that. And Edward is just kind of like, what are you talking about? And the senator tells him, like, look, that night, you called your dad called me, and I handled the situation. And Edward is kind of like, look, I blacked out, I don't remember anything that happened that night, I didn't kill that girl. And all throughout that scene, we're kind of seeing flashbacks as well. But they're very vague, of course. So in the flashbacks, you kind of see a young Edward, and he's waking up from what looks like a wild night of partying. And in the end, basically, he goes to the window, he looks out, and there's this dead girl, like, laying on the lawn. And you kind of don't get where he's at. It seemed like maybe he was at home, but I wasn't exactly sure. But you totally got from the flashback that he really doesn't remember what happened that night. Like, he looked very disoriented. So, yeah, I still think Edward is innocent. Y'all know that. I love Edward. After Edward goes to see the senator, finally Robert goes to see him. And Robert Bowers wins the award for this week's Gangsta in Deception because he goes to see the senator and, like, within 2 seconds of, like, being in the room, he ends up, like, hitting this guy. And he basically tells him, like, look, you wanted to have a sit down with me? Well, you're sitting down, I'm talking, don't go near my family again. And that's it. And then he walks out. So we're still not sure what went on between the two of these guys, but I'd say after this week, one thing we do know is that it is not resolved yet. Okay, so let's talk about the best part of this episode. J&J, Julian and Joanna. So, obviously, you know, she's wearing this wire and she's trying to get him to talk. So in their first little meeting, it's just like they're having drinks together. And they start talking and remembering, like, their teenage years. And then all of a sudden they start talking about this girl. And, you know, the two of them have this whole, like, real ease with each other and this little banter they have going on. But as they start talking about this girl, you get that Joanna was obviously jealous back when they were teenagers. And Julian really kind of calls her out on that. And it's just like, you were jealous because she was my first, right? And you get that Joanna immediately knows where this conversation is going. But at the same time, she knows she's wearing a wire and she knows that Will is on the other end. So she's trying to like misdirect as much as she can, but it's not working. So then Julian tells her like, yeah, she was my first, but she was always so jealous of you because I was your first. And then it was like, oh my gosh, poor Will, you know, who's just sitting on the other end like, what? And even though, like, I felt this whole episode, he kind of got on my nerves towards the end, you hated that he had to find out that way. Like, she totally should have told him that in the meeting, you know, at the beginning of the episode when he was putting the wire on her. She should have came clean then. So then, of course, when Joanna and Will get together the next day, he's, like, upset. And she's just like, you know, it was 17 years ago, and la la la. And they kind of get into a little bit, and then he asks her, like, do you still have feelings for this guy? And she gives him this really kind of vague answer, like something like, well, not now. Now that we think he's the murderer, I don't. And I just loved it because Will was like, I do not like that answer. So, of course, Miss Joanna is not done trying to get Julian to confess. So she kind of gets him to take her to dinner. You know, she keeps trying to bring Vivian up, and he's trying to avoid that topic. And she kind of touches a nerve with him at one point while they're having dinner, and she goes off to the bathroom. When she comes back, he's not there. And she glances out the window, she sees him sitting outside, and so she goes out with him, thinking, oh, this is it, he's gonna tell me. And he actually tells her about the fight. So he told her they had a fight, and that he hit her, and they did the flashbacks again that they showed last week, except they were extended. It just really seemed to me like Julian had no idea what Vivian was talking about, you know, like what her accusations were about. So he really seemed very innocent about that. Obviously they started arguing, you know, because she started calling him a fraud and all this other stuff, and how she was going to take Mia away and she was going to destroy the family, and that's what kind of escalated their argument. But yeah, as far as the Lyritrol stuff, he seemed to be completely in the dark. Now, of course, Will doesn't care about the fact that now, all of a sudden, you know, Joanna has decided, okay, Julian didn't do it. You know, he confessed to hitting her, they fought, and then he went home. But Will is still determined that this guy is guilty, and basically that's like his new favorite thing. So he kind of convinces Joanna, like, you need to finish what you started. So then, of course, when Julian calls to ask Joanna to come over to his house for dinner, Will is like, you need to go. So she goes to the house, you know, one last push to get him to confess. But at this point, she doesn't think he did it. So she starts questioning him about that night, and did you lie? Did you really come home? Did you find Vivian again after your argument? All this other stuff. Until finally he turns around and it's just like, look, like the fact that you think that I could kill anyone, let alone kill my sister, you know, means that, you know, whatever I thought was going on here between the two of us is not what I thought it was. And then he stopped chopping vegetables and was just like, you know what, I'm not really hungry anymore. Do you mind if we just call it a night? I'm going to bed. And that was it. So it was just like, shut it down, basically. So that ended the kind of like, you know, romantic liaison that I'm sure a lot of people were hoping for. That did not really happen because, you know, when you call somebody a murderer, that's not so sexy. Not so sexy at all. So then, in the end, the FBI is able to verify his timeline, and he's not a suspect anymore. At least for everyone except for Will. Now, there's this whole conversation, too, between Joanna and Will at the end that was very kind of like, I don't know, just the way it was worded. It seemed like very heavy. Because at one point, you know, she's just like, well, obviously he's not guilty. But Will is like, well, he could have hired somebody to do it. And you get that he's like gonna be on the Julian is guilty train forever. But there was this point where Joanna is kind of like, look, well, Julian's got an alibi, so he can't be guilty, so we're done with that. We're done. And then Will says to her, yeah, we're done. And it was just kind of like, okay, are we done? Are we saying we're done with that? Or we're done with us? Like, it was just a very kind of weird conversation. And then she apologizes to him, which I get a little bit, because she should have told him, like, in the very beginning. But at the same time, it was like, he was being a bit of a, like, he was driving me batty. So I just was kind of like, don't apologize to him. He needs to get over himself. But she did, and then he was just like, okay, well, you need to get back to work, detective. So it was just kind of like, okay, I don't know. So I don't know what's going on there. So towards the end of the episode, we see Ben again. And remember, Ben is on the run. Towards the end of the episode, Edward's obviously coming home from work one night. pulls his car in the garage, gets out of the car, and all of a sudden somebody sneaks up and bops him on the back of the head, and we see it's Ben. Ben steals his car and drives away. So by this time, Joanna is back at the house when all of a sudden Samantha, who is Edward's wife, shows up with the kids, and it's just like, go with your grandmother, I'm gonna go back to the hospital. And Joanna's like, what's happened? And so Samantha tells her, like, somebody came to the house, they stole Edward's car, and he's got a concussion, I've got to go back to the hospital. And then Joanna, in her, like, worst undercover cop ever, starts to, like, basically, like, grill this lady and ask her all these questions until she kind of realizes that he stole the car, but also Edward's work badge was in the car. So she heads back to the office to see if she can catch Ben, because she kind of puts two and two together and thinks it's him. And basically when she gets there, he's there. There's a little chase scene and a little fight scene, and the two are, like, scrapping around until she finally tells him, like, I'm here to help you. I'm a cop. Stop. And that was kind of the end of the episode. So she basically outed herself to Ben, but you get that they're going to bring him in and question him. I'm sure we'll be learning a lot more about what Ben got, because when Joanna found him, he was on one of the computers. And remember last week he said, all I need is 5 minutes. 5 minutes inside of Bowers Pharmaceutical, and I can get the evidence that you need to show that this drug Lyritrol is not a good thing. But I felt like this was a good episode. I will say again that I feel like this show keeps getting better and better. I continue to cross my fingers that it is doing well in the ratings and that lots of people are watching it so that it does not get canceled, because boy will I be disappointed if it does. Okay guys, that's it. That is this week's review of Deception. Don't forget that I do recaps and reviews for tons of other shows, so you definitely want to make sure to check those out. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you guys soon. Bye.